have only about 3 minutes, so I'm going to start to go through some of the announcements, and then I can kind of, if we have more time as people are joining, I can kind of go back through them again, because I know we want to get started right at the top of the hour. So this week, as you can see, our keyword is plan. So we're starting to get a little bit more crystallized on some of these things. So the plan is defined as a list of steps, timing, and resources required to achieve a specific outcome. So just very, very linear and specific now. If you remember way back to week 1, where we were talking strategy and organization and system. And then we kind of went into metrics and leader. And then last week we talked about change. So now we're up to making our plans. So for you, this means that you are going to be making a plan to complete and dry run your team's briefing at least once ahead of session 10. So something to think about and start working on. We do have some final project submissions from the past in the learning system. And I know some folks were asking about that. So if you go to the orientation and then go to about and then final submission, you can see some of the final project submissions from the past if you want to get some ideas and see what's been done. And then the other piece that we've got here is, you probably saw the email that came out from Peter, I think it was just yesterday or the day before, about the online interactive overview of the next session. And that's going to be on December 3rd. And Peter, what time was that again?
I think it's the usual 9 o'clock, but if you hit that link, it opens to a registration. And we're not so much necessarily thinking you should come, although you are welcome, because we love having past participants in the overview to answer questions for prospective participants about what it's really like to be in the program. So if you know anybody that might like to go through the experience you're going through in this program, please let them know and encourage them to attend that session. Even if they just register, just by registering, they'll be getting some information about the program.
And with that, it is the top of the hour. So I'll turn it back to you, Peter.
All right. Welcome everybody to IntelliVen, Managed to Lead Immersion Program, 7 Truths to help you change the world. Topic 7, do and review, Cohort 8. So today we'll do the usual ramp up. We have some good points to work with you on in the ramp up from last session to this session. And then we'll spend about the rest of the first hour covering some content and setting up for a case that we'll work on in the second hour called Utilization Matters. And then we'll do the usual wrap up. So we'll start with the takeaways. Peggy's going to take us through these this week.
Sure, thanks, Peter. Takeaways this week, rich as always, and noting, first of all, sort of great appreciation for the steps, the tips, and the role plays that are coming out in the session. In this case, it was 4 steps to change the game, 5 steps to a sale, 3 steps to selling services that were really highly valued by you all. On the tips front, it was sales tips and the tips around the change framework, which you'll see in a moment. And then noting how the role plays really help you get in the game. There's no substitute for actually putting yourself in the position of the situation that you're going to be in and getting yourself to act and react in the moment as a way of prepping. And then around the change framework, strong noting that it provides context that helps build buy-in and fosters alignment and sets the stage for action, as shown here. Again, interesting that alignment and value of has come up in every single session takeaway that we have shown here, which is good. And then noting that the change initiatives most often touch the triple helix of evolution in systems, process, and behavior. So we are extensively linking all those three.
Allison, we're getting some scratches. Maybe mute everybody and then unmute Peggy.
Sure. I'm going to mute everybody. Okay. All right, everybody should hopefully be muted now, except for me, hopefully. um, so some questions here that we want to get answered. So thinking about, oh, we went backwards. Okay. Thinking about the session last week and wondering if the pitch perfect role play mechanics got messed up somehow.
The short answer is yes. Mea culpa. I landed in the wrong room and then wasn't sure how to play any kind of role, and I got bopped out to the other room thinking I was in the next role when that group needed the other role. So there was just a real set of confusing things that happened that were a mess up. So sorry about that.
At the same time, right, it's an exercise in resilience, right, Peggy? So either way, wouldn't the role play have gone more smoothly if we'd known more about the company we were pitching? Peter, I think you're, who's Peter talking or Peggy?
I'll talk on this one.
Okay, you were on mute.
This is a powerful question, and I'm going to give you a powerful answer, so listen carefully. There is the sense that you would be able to handle that situation, that case, that pitch differently or better if you knew more about the organization. But part of this case was you didn't know about the organization. And the answer to the question is, wouldn't it have gone more smoothly if we knew more? It depends on what kind of consultant you want to be. And the answer to that question should be defined by the moment. If you know the answer or have a lot of information and can get the answer, that puts you in position to maybe be one of the first three kinds of consultants. You could be a strategy consultant, an implementation consultant, and an operator consultant. And in those cases, you come in armed with a lot of information about the world in which the person you're talking to, the company or organization you're talking to works. So you're almost an expert, or you know a lot and can get to be looking like an expert, or you know a lot about them. But if you're a process consultant, a development consultant, then the point of the case is that you can use the tools you've learned to work with and manage to lead to be incredibly helpful even without knowing a thing. So yeah, the answer is yes if you want to be any of these kind of consultants. But if you want to provide not the answer, but a path to the answer for the client to find the answer on their own, you can in fact be incredibly helpful without knowing a thing. And in fact, in that case, I didn't know, I was the one who was the consultant and I didn't know anything about that organization, and simply said, do you know what you want to have happen here? If the leader says yes, then we say, well, does your team know what you want? And do they want the same thing? And they say yes or no. If they say yes, then we say, well, maybe we should check to be sure. And then we use the change framework approach to survey and pull data. And I don't know a thing about the organization, but I can tell you at the end of that, whether the team is on board with the leader. If the leader says, no, I don't know what I want to do, then we execute this process to help the leader work with their team to figure out what to do. So the point of the case is, with the tools you've learned to work with so far, you don't need to know anything about the operation. If you do, fine. And you should strive to and should incorporate what you learn as you go and develop a point of view and share it. But the point is, with a pure process approach, it can be incredibly powerful. And you can see that played out. If you look at the follow-on material from last topic session, 6.3, look at the video of Eric explaining how he took what we provided, what MTL gave him to work with, to drive an incredible set of interventions that led to a year ahead of plan, a 4 times return on invested capital for the private equity owners of that operation. Peggy, did you want to throw anything in there?
I'm curious how this lands on people.
It makes a lot of sense to me if you're asking for input. That makes a lot of sense to me. That is, I guess, what a consultant does. They go in with very limited knowledge of the situation and they try to make sense of everything. And they provide an answer.
Depends on the kind of consultant again, because if you're calling on somebody who knows your business, your industry, and knows where you're out of sync with best practices, then they know the answer. If you're a process consultant who helps people get inside of each other's heads and see what they're thinking and put it on a table for constructive work, they don't know the answer. They just know how to get to an answer. So it's completely different. And what we were trying to do here is create a situation where not knowing anything is actually powerful. You can be made powerful with the tools that you have. Now, it's a little bit of a trick, right? Because we said, and I have done this the hundreds of times we've done this program to hundreds of people and hundreds of people. Everybody's gone through the same learning process. It's a little bit of a trick because we're teaching you process, and then we're putting you into a situation where your kind of instinct is to be an expert, to go find the answer, right? So we kind of put you back into the old world. And what we really wanted you to do is take the tools and use them. And most people don't do that naturally until we have this sort of disruptive intervention here where you say, oh, I could have used those tools in a completely different way. So there's nothing wrong with what happened. It's just part of the learning in this program. And you know, we could do it differently, but this is the way we do it. And we hope you see the opportunity to take these tools and use them in maybe a way you hadn't thought of, because here we have a situation where you could have and you didn't. And you said, gee, I really wish I knew more. I said, well, but that's the case. Peggy, you want to play off that, or does anybody else want to say anything?
So I would say, as somebody who in one of my former lives did this kind of process consulting, is that it's scary and it's risky and it's not easy. And so I'd like to hear you guys elaborate on ways in which we could take some steps in our everyday lives, you know, to test this out. For example, I'm thinking, gosh, I need to be checking in with my team, you know, mates a little more about how are you, you know, where are you at on this issue? I'd love to hear more from you all so we can kind of take it away and practice it more in a safe space and get used to doing it. I mean, I'm telling you, I was in the organization I was in had to do its own major internal change.
So
to get people to want to be process consultants.
That's excellent. Can anybody before we do, anybody want to take a shot at that? How would you use with these tools now that you see the oh, well, I could use these in a different way than I was thinking. How would you sort of manufacture opportunity to test it? Alan or Rodney?
Well, my first thought is that since during the process of learning these tools and truths, I'm seeing opportunities present themselves every day. So that's the answer initially, my initial answer.
Alan, anything specific come to your mind?
Well, off the top of my head.
How about take anybody trying to do anything that involves other people working with them. Just take it, you know, you could even ask, Alan, you could ask Andrew, do you know what you're trying to do? And Andrew says, yes or no. If he says yes, you say, do the people working with you know what you're trying to do? And he says, I think so. You say, well, maybe we should check. And then you pull out the change framework and you say, have each of them fill it out. Say, how are things now? Why do they need to be different? And you have them each fill it out independently. That's sort of the beauty of the tool, right? If you just put everybody in a group, they would all wait for the leader to talk and then everybody would do a checkout and everybody would assume everything's okay. But when you pull it apart and you give each person the WWW or the change framework or whatever of the templates where you're working with, they fill it out separately. So you take what's in their head, put it into a form that you can then all look at, say 5 different answers. They say, whoa, we thought we were aligned, but we really weren't. So I would say, Carolyn, take anybody doing anything that involves some other people helping them do it, and ask the leader, do you know what you're trying to do? You could, you know, remember if you read Covey, right? 7 Habits for a Balanced Life and Effective Life. What's the first question? The first of the truth, the first of the steps is end in mind. What are you trying to do? And then first things first, how important is it? Then be proactive. What have you done to do it? It's the same kind of thing. You just take anybody doing anything and ask them, do you know what you're trying to do? And do the people who are working with you know what you're trying to do? And do they have the same idea that you do? And either the answer is yes, and you can say, well, let's check it out to be sure. Or the answer is no, then you use the process to help them make sure they all get aligned. I would encourage.
And you actually did that in the ramp up in the pre-session. You always ask that question, you know, right. What's your end game? Right. You ask Nick directly, you know, you trying to sell the business? Are you trying to be here? You know, you actually start practicing at before we even get to the program.
Right, and then maybe secretly also ask Tony, Dan, and Jason and see what their answers are. But I like to
Right.
have them independently so that I know what each of them is thinking and can develop a point of view on whether they're aligned and then help them from there.
Yep.
So thank you.
Well,
I might offer, oh, go ahead, Peggy.
Michelle, go after you. You go.
You know, it also strikes me, at least from my experience, especially if this is just like experiment in real life, you might want to start with setting some ground for permission.
Right.
Not everybody wants your opinion. And so if it's oh, I've identified someone who's trying to do something in real life, let me just be like, what are you trying to do? Do you know if your team's aligned with you? Like, if people aren't inviting it, they're not going to receive it.
Yeah, you could do, that's a good idea. You could say, is it okay if I try something with you? That's a good statement.
Or just like, you know, are you, you know, like, would it be helpful to have a thought partner? Like, you know, you want to bounce some ideas off of, like, but making sure that you've set the groundwork for some of that. Otherwise, I don't know that it's going to be received in the same way.
Okay, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, there's two things I want to pick up on Rodney's point as I share what you're saying, Rodney, in terms of starting to see the world through the frameworks that we're being exposed to here. And as that starts to happen, it's like, just roll with it. Like, I see everything as a change framework.
Me too.
Everything is a change story.
Like even this thing right here, what we're doing right now, we saw you seeing something in a different way than we wanted you to see it. That's not where we wanted it to be. It was important that we got you to the point where you were seeing it differently, which is the end state. So there's things we needed to do right here, right now to get from here to there. That's a little mini version of it right there, Carolyn.
Right. And it often comes back to that. And I find that it's, well, Peter's words would be disarmingly simple. Like it always comes back to a change story, and that's okay. In fact, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Like, hold that framework and be thinking in that way, and then take the action to build clarity yourself, and then alignment with others around that.
It even works with bringing up kids, because you have kids that are behaving one way, you want them behaving another way. So what's the right intervention to get it there? Is it to come down on them or to create opportunity for them to be the way you want them to be? I mean, it's all change framework. All right, let's go on.
I want to say one other thing, Peter, before we move
right.
here, because we shifted into the discussion about process and being a process consultant, which is exactly what we're talking about. And the point I'd like to make is that there is more value to be added through process consulting, where there's also a point of view that you're offering, than strict process. So my guidance here is, please continue to engage your brain and have a point of view or a theory or hypothesis on what it is that's going on around you, versus only running the process. It's a much higher level of value that you will be able to add if you continue to engage your own mind based on your own experience and thought capability, and encourage everybody to do so.
Yeah, they're actually, I mean, whenever there's something going on, and here's you and here's another person, and here's the content that you're dealing with, there's also the surround. So if this is the content and this is the process, most of us sort of adopt and spend more time in one of these than the other. So you might think, MBAs or business people are all about the content, and OD people, MSODs are all about the process. So what has evolved is sort of the idea of putting the two together. You've got a business person and a process person who work together to cover both bases. But what Peggy's saying is you can get, each one can do more of the other, and they'll be better off for it, even if they, like Peggy and I right now. Why don't you describe what we talked about at the end of last session, Peggy, where it's the leader and the coach kind of thing.
Right, so Peter mostly playing content lead role, me mostly playing responsibility for environment and support for the process and the OD pieces in this environment.
And
And we also said to each other, you know what, neither of us are going to stay just in that role. We're going to flip back and forth. And that's
right, so
really
I am pretty good at process. I'm really good at content. Peggy is pretty good at content and really good at process. And neither of us are all one or the other, but we're together. It's incredibly powerful. So that we're modeling right here what we're talking about. All right, so let's now get to the juicy question that Andrew asked. Allison, do you want to set us up?
Sure. So is it better to keep initial studies fees and scope small to get a contract with higher odds of a large amount of follow-on, or turn the upfront work into a package service offering, but with no guarantee of getting the long-term work?
So Andrew, Peggy and I and Jim and others that we've worked with over the decades have long struggled with this very question. What we've concluded is the best way to build a valuable services business is with not large, but large, long-term complex projects, right? Because they have a lot of value being delivered in exchange for a lot of compensation over a long period of time, and a nice portfolio of those is really nice to have. And lots of upfront studies where many do not turn into long-term clients is a very hard way to build a business. Because there's this thing called frictional unemployment or bench time, where you have people coming off and on of projects, and you have to keep so many of those projects coming into the pipeline that it's really impossible to do. What you want are small projects that turn into large projects. So what you want to try to do is the small projects that will lead to the big ones. So if you had your choice, you would only do the small ones that would lead to the big ones. And then you would charge for the upfront work only what the prospect will pay. In other words, don't lose it for price if you have a good opportunity for follow-on. On the other hand, do charge, don't give it away, because it is in a sense paid marketing. But if you don't charge for it, it becomes another thing, and it's a gift, and it's often looked at as scant, and it's not really fruitful. So what we say is charge what you can. We always say do the largest small project that someone will actually pay for, and then sell that in the context of all of the things you'll eventually do, so that it's seen from the beginning as a small project that's a part of a large effort. So that's the way we've come to look at it. Peggy and Jim might want to weigh in. And
Yeah, I was just going to give a real example. So we went after some work in an area that we were trying to play a framework of strategic planning, and it was less than strategic planning. It was really putting together an updated version of a water resources program. And we weren't a environmental firm. It was just two of us, and we knew what the budget was, and we put in a bid right underneath it. We customized it totally to what their needs were, provided the point of view, won this very small project, and then we're still been working with this client for the last 3 years. And they've asked us to extend our contract to help us again with the water resources program coming up and beginning next month. So if you perform well and you have a good relationship, you offer perspectives, they keep coming back to you.
Andrew, do you have an initial reaction to the answer?
It kind of reinforces what we already know. We're always in debate about it. Do we cap what we're doing? Do we do it for a slimmer the burden cost we have? Do we charge it full? Do we package it? It's easier not to have more bells and whistles and make it a little really slim. And they like you easier, but when you're really charging a premium fee, you really got to perform for something that.
Yeah, I think if you want, I would say if you're doing it for a situation where there's not a high probability of follow-on, charge full bore. And if they're willing to pay your top margin for that work, fine. If you have the capacity, but if you have the capacity, if you don't have the capacity, it's tight, then I wouldn't even do that. Only do projects that are gonna, only do small projects that have a high probability of leading to big projects. If you want to talk about it more later, we can. Do you want to talk?
Okay.
The point I wanted to emphasize is the notion of painting the picture for the prospect of the entire journey that they're likely to need to go on in order to complete what they're about to start. So help from the very front, from the very beginning, show the whole picture and how the first piece is just a bite on that. So that
yeah, so this is what you want to sell, this big thing here, right? But you don't want to give all this away because it's so very expensive to get them from point 0 to here. So what you want to do is a small project that leads to a bigger project, that leads to a bigger project, that leads to this project. right? And then you keep going from there. So the question is, when we say the largest small project, so which of these can you sell? If you have to start with the tiny one, or maybe you can get away with starting with this one or this one. But the idea is to provide value, get compensated for it, but always in the context of this whole thing. So you would show this whole picture from the beginning and then get them on the roadmap for that.
Okay, thank you.
Good luck with that. Okay, let's jump into today's content. So today, doing review, leaders are who turn initiatives into the actions that it takes for those to become successful. And the way they make sure they become successful is they don't stop paying attention. They actually continuously set up a systematic way to stay in touch with what's going on and review the progress that initiatives are making. And that's what's key to success. And today, what we're going to do is learn to plan, do, review. Put together a plan, do something, review what happened against the plan, and then learn from that and go forward. And also learn that reviews and reviewers are what are key to operations, good governance, and success. So the truth today is it pays to pay attention, and which drives the action. Okay, if that's true, then I should, whenever I do something, pay attention to what was I trying to do, what I did do, what happened, what do I learn, what am I going to do next, and then to review that with not just in my head, but with others involved and outside reviewers to figure out how to progress from where we are with the next steps. So you take an action, review what happens in a continuous virtuous cycle. Okay, so let's put together a plan here. Let's say we have a case where revenue is X and we want to stay in business and we can't stay in business with X, so we want to get 20% more than X. So the question for you all is, what goes in the line here? What's a good initiative in this case? Name an initiative you would launch in this case. You can put it in the chat. I'm also happy to have you open your mic and just yell something. What would you put here? What are you going to do to go?
Sales, up your sales.
Up your sales. Okay, so Tony's brilliant. He says sell more. Is that an initiative? Tony, go sell more. What are you going to do? Right? I think that's really more of a goal than an initiative. But it's what comes to mind, right? That's the goal. What we need to do is force ourselves to go down a level and say, well, what do we mean by that? How about something like launch a campaign to target a certain type portfolio? In this case, I threw out large scale tech companies, right? So now you can start to say, oh, that's going to drive me to do some stuff like put together a plan, list the characteristics of the ideal targets, list all large tech companies, determine which 3 have the best potential based on their match to the characteristics, map the key players in key roles in those organizations to determine who I should call and what do I want to talk to them about. What am I going to say when I get there, and then determine who we want to speak with about what, and then who's going to do that, blah, 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 blah. That's a plan to do this initiative to make that goal. See the difference between a goal and a plan? Everybody? Yeah, put anything in the chat there, I see. Increase price, okay, good. Increase pricing, launch a new product, enter a new market. Excellent, guys, okay. I think you got it. Now, when we put this plan together, we say plan, as Allison was telling us at the beginning, a plan is the set of steps that are going to be done over time by resources which you've allocated to accomplish a result. So what does that look like? Well, here's the Microsoft Office version of that. You have a list of activities that are spread out over time with milestones marked and when they're going to be doing what. And the only thing this doesn't show is who's going to be doing it, but you can see how that could be inserted. So what you do is prepare a plan, or what we call a roadmap, to show what it is supposed to happen when for each stream of work. So there's this phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, each of those is a stream. And then you can make it pretty if you're going to brief somebody on it. Sometimes hard to look at a chart that looks like this, and you go make it easier. We call it a stylized roadmap or plan. And then you can get highly stylized. And if you're talking to people, you're trying to convince them to be supportive and perhaps invest or spend money on you or authorize you to do something, you might want to make it a little bit more engaging, you might go to the trouble of preparing something like this, which there are companies that specialize in helping teams come up with stylized versions of their plans because they draw people in, whereas plans like this kind of make people tune out. That's your choice, but that's just FYI. All right, here we are. So we've just now gotten to a major milestone here. So what's the steps here? What we say is, here's all your initiatives, remember that. And then we put together the heat map, then based on ease and value. How does everything fall out? Who are we going to put in charge? Well, we know we're going to have a sponsor and someone in charge who's going to then put together a change framework for the initiative and that they've been assigned. And then we're going to turn that initiative into a set of action steps by assigning resources and making sure we bring the rich thinking that led to coming up with the initiative to mind. And we're going to deal with a lot of things and watch a lot of things to make sure it happens. We're going to put together the roadmap and everything's going to be great. Right? Piece of cake. What goes wrong here? So what goes wrong? Those of you who did the prep, the 7.1 topic content for today would have looked at the Cohort 8 reasons why initiatives go awry. Anybody remember any of those?
Insufficient executive attention to the initiative. So
you're jumping all the way to the answer. What does Cohort say? Cohort says no one declared a sense of urgency that made it important to jump up and do something. They said nobody put together a team of people that were in charge of making it happen. It wasn't clear about what they were trying to do. The failure to communicate to anybody what it was you were trying to do, for what reason, and where you were going. Nobody was actually empowered to do anything. There was an attempt to try to do too much instead of a lot of little things. It was one huge leap and it was just overwhelming. A failure to consolidate and build on the things that did work along the way and to turn them into something bigger. So those are the 8 reasons Cohort says initiatives tend to fail. And by fail, we mean fail to live up to their full potential. It's not that they outright did nothing. Usually something good happens, but perhaps most of the time, maybe 70–80% of the time, according to the literature, not as much as was originally envisioned. And by that 70–80% figure, there's a lot of debate about whether that's true. And there's some interesting content in the additional materials from today's topic that you might be interested in looking at if you want to hear what the debate is about that. But either way, we know things could go better. And like Carolyn says, there's another pundit out there that says the reason initiatives tend to underperform is that management's not paying attention. Because if management were paying attention, whichever of Cohort's 8 things were driving it in the wrong direction would be seen and addressed. So the overarching, overwhelming point is you have to pay attention, which is why we say it pays to pay attention. And what we need is a system or systematic way to make it easy and possible for top of the house to stay connected to the front line and pay attention.
And Peter, to that point in the chat, Lori put that the most important person was not at the meeting. So.
Right. We'll get to that, Lori. I know you love that one. What is going on here? Again, this was in the prep. So this is, somebody want to tell me, Tony, I imagine, given that you had some great answers to the questions in the prep, you probably looked at this. Were you able to figure out what this is trying to say? I noticed Tony's picture's off. He may have had to go off.
I'm sorry. I had an emergency I'm working on. I'm sorry. I'll have to come back. I had to leave for a minute.
Are you back, or should we go to somebody else?
Can you go to somebody else? Yeah, I'm still working on it.
All right, anybody get into this picture? So when I actually asked people, have you, I think back in the input today, I said, when was the last time the initiative you're working on was looked at or reviewed by those you're doing it for? And most executives say, well, I don't need a special meeting for that. I'm in constant touch with what's going on with people, and interrupt them at the water cooler all the time and get an update. And we say, well, that's nice, but that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is a systematic process for pulling together everything that's going on against something important and seeing how it's going. What are you trying to do? What have you done to do it? What's happened so far? What have you learned from that? What are you going to do next? Put that into a conversation that has been prepared for by the leader of whoever of that initiative. So the leader pulls together against that agenda and sits down and reviews it with those with a stake in what's going on and can be helpful on a regular basis. So the boss and the expert in another thing from another place, a peer from somewhere else, and then the team. And they lead a discussion. And that's just good governance. And you can do that ad hoc, just sort of the water cooler, you can do it systematic, you can do it in a sort of a one-on-one, the boss and the initiative leader, but it's much richer if you have a group, as I was just describing, have a rich set of input. And that rich set of input providers could be inside the organization or could include some people outside the organization who have knowledge to bear and to bring to the picture. A lot of good things happen when you do this. Management gets to see what's going on and learn from what's going on and cross-fertilize and become, all in all, a much richer experience and provide the guidance that's needed to.
It's also very important, Peter, to ask questions to help raise the thinking of that team during those reviews.
Right, that's the reviewer's job. The reviewer's job is to ask two kinds of questions. One is for clarity. What did you mean by that? What about this? What about that? So just to kind of make sure that what the team is saying is being understood. The second type of question is a question that gets the team to think, that pushes up their thinking. And you ask it in a constructive way. And that's as opposed to piling on and just jumping in, which are some of the reasons why reviews sometimes underperform, which we'll get to in a minute. But the idea is we want a continuous process of these sorts of things. So each of these is a meeting in the review here, and then that drives a lot of things to happen. And then there's another review, which drives a lot of things to happen, another review. And so this is sort of how it looks, an infinite series of meetings about an initiative, about a business, about a function. Or you might have an infinite series of these of the sales team. It could be about a business unit. It could be about any function or process, or an initiative. Go into the tech market and sell this thing to the high-end tech. So I find when I'm running a business, I spend most of my time simply going from review meeting to review meeting to stay in touch with what's going on, with what's important. So you have a system of governance. And as Lori is excited to get into, there are a lot of reasons why reviews don't end up being as successful as we're telling you they should be or can be. And here's the 8. What I'm wondering is, did any of these resonate with you? Is anything you want to talk about? Lori, now is the time for you to make that point.
Well, how many times do you plan something and the most important person at the last minute runs off and can't be at the meeting? It seems.
So if that happens, Lori, do you cancel the meeting or do you have the meeting anyway?
Well, this is happening with us right now. We have a big thing going on, and some important person that we had asked to attend can't come. So we decided, since everyone else committed their time who are also important, that we were going to meet with this person separately to the meeting and share it. So we didn't have to blow up the whole clown, but it is frustrating.
Does anybody want to comment, like what, if the person that, let's say the CEO doesn't show up in the last minute, something really important happened, the team had spent weeks preparing, the CEO didn't show up. Should you have the meeting or not?
In that case, probably not.
Well, I think you can, my experience is you can have it because you know what, most of the value is in the preparation anyway. So you've gotten a lot of the value. You have the meeting, other people do show up, good things happen. If the CEO then watches the video of it or looks at the notes and engages and follows up and then does something because of what happened, then maybe that's okay. But that's maybe okay like once. But if you did it every time, you would soon lose all the energy and it would not be providing the value. So I would say if there's been a pattern of those CEOs showing up and they just happen to miss one, I wouldn't necessarily not have it. You could just reschedule it so it would show up. But if the idea is don't have that as a pattern. because you're essentially cratering the whole process.
Right.
Anybody else want to comment on any of the other points?
I like the thing about not piling on.
Yeah. Yeah, that happens a lot.
And the so psychological safety is, de rigueur now, that creating that safe environment is so important and for so many reasons. And I think that's a real key one for me as well.
And I was going through this, I was wanting to add management, you can easily drive a dog and pony show where everything's looking really fine just because nobody wants to look bad or something. But the idea here is it has to be the truth. What's really going on? You got to make it a safe environment for the leader in the team to share what's really going on, that's why you set up that question. What were you trying to do? What did you do? What happened when you did it? What did you learn from that? What are you going to do next? And then you engage. And you do that in a constructive way. And then what happens, and we've all been in situations where all of a sudden we all see something the team missed. And then Jim says it, then I say it, then Peggy says it, then Michelle says it. And it's like each one of us, we're just piling on. And the team becomes deflated and feels horrible and goes away in misery, as opposed to feeling like they've been through a helpful experience. And what other ones? Anybody else? Denise, do you have a favorite? Go ahead. Who's that?
It was Carolyn. I said, I actually, when I, again, formalized, I was in an organization where the quarterly review kind of overtook the value. I mean, it was the prep and making something very pleasing, and it got very much into a political dance. And actually, I've been in another organization where deliberately the leaders specified, no, we're going to keep, no PowerPoints. We're going to keep this to, some key exhibits, but, and, length and so on, to just basically make sure the team was spending their time thinking about those questions that you just said. What did we set out to do? What happened? What did we actually do? What happened? So I've seen it both ways. And
it's easy for this to get on autopilot and becomes drudgery for everybody, the doers, the executives. But if management and leadership lean into this and see the value, the constructive value, and they can decide to make it work. And it's not that every CEO, every leader, every manager is good at this, but there are people who are, and you can hire them and retain them to help govern, set up a governance process using what we call sort of a managed lead governance process. We recommend everybody do that, whether they work with us or not, or our tools or not, but to set that up and make sure that it's running is itself an initiative. And it needs to be led and managed by someone who is good at that, likes doing it, wants to do it, and can be hired, engaged to do it. That person, that team might already be in the organization, or might be someone you invite in to help set that up and do it.
My point is that, I think people over-engineer these things, and we're sitting here with a tiny organization. I think regular reviews would really benefit us, and we need to really identify for Rescue SF, how do we want to conduct these in a way that doesn't overwhelm us and take too much time? We want to match the input to the value. We want the value received to be greater than the input, in my opinion.
Right.
To be an ROI on this. And it can be done very simply if you identify the key pieces. Because I imagine many people here are in the same position, like, I'm not going to make a 20 page PowerPoint deck.
Right. But
Caroline, if I can offer, I've been practicing some agile mechanisms to do a quicker cadence for some initiatives for my clients. And so you could probably think about how you can do that, even if it's a daily stand-up or a weekly stand-up, very quickly, just applying some agile concepts to not make it like I work through, the pre-meeting, the meeting, the after meeting, and you have like 100-page deck by the time you get through with it. So that's what I've been trying to do.
Yeah, it can become a bureaucratic process with a life of its own. That's sheer drudgery for everybody. Don't let that happen. The agile methodology sort of extreme the other direction. A lot of little shots that keep things moving, and sort of. But I still think, even in an agile methodology, once in a while, this kind of review is really helpful and really good to do with those outside the process of the agile process. This, by the way, the roots of this go back to work that was done at GE, what's called the workout program. It was helped by a professor, Verbiniak at Wharton, and he wrote a book called Making Strategy Work. And there's tons of books about strategy, but very few about how do you actually do the stuff you come up with. Really, that's where we are as well. And when I developed this program, I was informed by that author in that book, because that was one that the university I was working with gave me to start with. So all that we're doing is sort of building and expanding around that. But this at the core is very key and very fundamental to successful implementation of execution of any initiative. Remember, we're all here to change the world, and we have to do something to make that happen, and we want to make sure it does. Now listen, the point I was going to make is that many leaders, I don't know if it's most leaders, but lots of us have lots of ideas, and we get a lot of energy from ideas. And we have the ideas, and then we assign someone to do the ideas, then we go off, and what do? Have more ideas, right? So we tend to just assume that the idea that was then assigned is now done, but that's not done, and that's the gap. So what the leader who has a hard time disciplining themselves to stay with the implementation side of their ideas needs a COO or a lieutenant or a lieutenant who does like doing that and who gets the energy from that. Denise, you've been quiet. I want to know what you're thinking about all this to share with us.
Yeah, I was thinking about the that if it's not a safe and collaborative environment, then it starts to feel like oversight, and then the reporting is a spin rather than a dialogue.
Right.
And so, I only want to say the good stuff. I only want to, I don't really want to. And so, and again, it's really up to the leader to create that kind of collaborative environment where people can say, this is what I've achieved and these are my gaps. Can you help me?
And this is where leader and coach really need, like a lot of times the leader doesn't know how to do that. And that's where the coach or the HR VP or the ODB person becomes very helpful. Two of my favorites, the leader did not prepare, so the meeting becomes the preparation, right? So you really weren't ready for the review. And we spend the entire meeting sort of getting to the point where we can now have the discussion, and now the time has run out, we have to leave. That's horrible. Yeah. That happens all the time. Another one of my favorites is management fails to really see what needs to be done and then do something about it. So Peggy and I were doing a project for a large financial organization, and the project we were on it was in trouble. And we did several reviews, and every review pointed to the same problem. And we said, yep, that's a problem. And then we would have the next review, and yep, still a problem. We just failed to really recognize it and do what needed to be done until the problem blew up. So that's where we learned how to put that point on here. You remember that one, Peggy?
Absolutely.
I don't even have to tell you what it was, okay.
Not a great memory.
This chart here is basically saying, if you want to work on your do, your sell, your growth system, think about it this way. What is it you're about to do, and put a projection together, and then do something, and then look at how what you did compares to what you said was going to happen. So you put out a projection, you take action, you take a measurement and say, did what I did generate the result I had in mind? If it did, and everything's fine, just keep on going. If it didn't, then you say, well, what, why now, what, so what? What actually happened? Why did it happen? How does it vary from what I thought was going to happen? What do I learn from that? And what am I going to do differently? Am I going to project differently or perform differently? And this is a sort of a virtuous scientific method applied to a business function activity, which we recommend you set up for every one of your do, sell, and growth systems, and to iterate towards where you want it to be in the long run. And every once in a while, don't forget to check on, hey, are we done yet? Has our ultimate goal been achieved? And if you have, then maybe it's time to set a new goal or end. Okay, so when we say leader, we've been using the term leader as if it's the CEO, but remember, when we have a bunch of initiatives, we put people in charge of them, we take the executive top team and assign a sponsor who provides a leverage for the CEO. So essentially the top leader is giving that CEO leader responsibility for oversight and governance to one of the top team. And that way you can do more of these. And so what the leader does is, in this is sort of the summary or the tips, assign an initiative sponsor. who's going to keep an eye on this for us? And then the sponsor supports the manager, whoever the leader of the action plan, putting together the plan and driving the plan. They're going to work in a symbiotic way. The initiative sponsor provides support, guidance, governance, knows what's going on, gets rid of barriers, provides air cover, creates a conduit to the top team. And then convenes what you can call them action learning reviews or executive reviews. And the idea is to say every step is, every one of those is really, well, what did you try? What were you trying to do? What did you actually do? What happened when you did it? Why did what happened? What do you learn from that? Why did what happen? What are you going to do differently now that you've learned from that? And what are you going to do next? So it's what, why, so what, now what? Review, this is what Jim was saying earlier, reviewers ask questions to draw you out and push up your thinking and then offer advice. So don't just jump on the advice and try to keep it from being piling on. And the process person can help orchestrate this. Okay, the team is presented, let's have draw out questions, let's have push up questions. Okay, now let's do advice. And everybody give just the one bit of best advice to give some process management to that executive session. And you keep doing these until the goal is achieved or they're no longer providing value. And even as I mentioned, just preparing for a review like this enhances performance, because people rarely take the time to step back and say, what am I trying to do? How do I put that in a form I can articulate to somebody? And when so doing, then figure out, oh, what am I doing that for? So a lot of good things happen just from the prep. And then no one wants to show up to the next review not having done what they said they would do in this at the end of this review. So it does provide a kind of a constant mechanism for making sure what was planned to happen actually happens, especially if you do these, people call these like 30-30-30, right? What am I going to do in the next 30 days? What did I do in the last 30 days? And this sort of a cycle of, just keep on doing them, the 30-30s. The reality is you should schedule them not necessarily on a regular time slice, but on when it makes sense to have framing. So when you're close to a milestone or you're about to make a major decision or move from one phase to the next, and set them up intelligently, not just based mindlessly on every 3 months or every 6 months, because then they will become monotonous, routine, and not that valuable. So there we are. Any comment on all of that? Simple, right?
Deceivingly simple.
Deceivingly simple, disarmingly simple. It's kind of remarkably simple, which brings us to, to make all that happen actually isn't even that hard. It's just not fun for most people. I mean, most people put more energy out of having new ideas or doing things, but not in this type of governance. So that's why we say, it's really a force of will on the part of leadership to decide. Like if leaders say, do I have to do this on everything? What do you think our answer is? How about only do it on the important things? And then all those other things that are not important, why are you doing them? So they end up being the yes, because you only want to do important things for which you do this. And then you have sort of cleaned it up in both dimensions. Denise, you're smiling.
Well, it's always hard to let go of the things that are great ideas, but somehow never get traction. So right. It's, we're loyal to abandoned children that we should abandon.
Michelle, how does this play in the municipal world that you've been in?
I don't know. I probably a little bit more picking up on some of Jim's point, like, whether or not there are really formalized processes for all of this stuff, and in some ways perhaps a bit more agile. I always, someone who I always find it very fascinating that people have this image of government being this really bureaucratic, ineffective. I actually am quite amazed at the magic that happens within government, and because of the behemoth institutions that they are. But there is no doubt that I think, and this isn't specific to government, doing what I mean, my term instead of this action learning review is, you know, taken from the military, doing after action reviews. And I think after action reviews can be really useful, both in breaking down what went wrong, but also what went right. Like, I don't think people think about that as much. Like, it's important to be intentional in recognizing why did this work, not just why didn't it, so that you can like remember to repeat that in your after actions.
Right. That's why right here we say, you know, to spread the learning. What worked here, let's make it work everywhere. And that's one of Cotter's things too, institutionalizing what did work. Sorry, I wasn't sharing there. There's a couple things. We should tell you that Peggy, Jim, and I have used this extensively in government. Peggy's used it at FEMA, DFAS. Jim's, where have you used it in IRS? Where else have you used it, Jim?
Oh, GSA, NOAA, Navy, Air Force, Army.
Well, we've all done this in both government, non-government. We've done it with, you know, churches and social groups, and it really just works, right? So, as you were saying, even in government, right, people have this concept of bureaucracy, but it always comes down to people doing things, right? So if you want to increase the odds to get that. Now, Jim, I don't think you meant to say that the agile process is instead of this. The agile process, correct. It's a continuous version of this. You're doing it in a mini version of this kind of all the time in the flow. But there's still virtue in having executive reviews at key points to have this discipline, to keep the top of the house connected, to know what's going on, to see what needs to be course correct.
Yeah, and that's what I said in the chat, Peter. It's the executive reviews also brings the outside of the team perspective that you can help lift the team's thinking.
Right. All right. Anybody else?
It's one more piece to chime in on around the resources to assign in that it takes to do this kind of thing is often a spot where I think leaders underestimate and or understand what capability they have to actually do these kinds of things. And so it takes resource. And through this process, the organization can also learn how to do this and build the capability to be doing it more and more often as it unfolds, which is another good objective to have in so doing.
So I see Mark, Carolyn, Lori, your Rescue SF initiative program is going to ultimately end up with supporting or identifying and supporting a set of initiatives that are going to come out of that. They're going to get launched. Then the question is, who's going to do all this for that? Who's going to govern that? And I think what you're going to find is, first of all, if you don't do something, it won't get governed and it won't happen. Because there probably isn't a natural institutionalized competence of this sort already embedded. So the idea ultimately would be, well, whoever's doing the initiatives, that just should be part of doing it. But that won't happen unless you make it happen. So the encouragement there is for you to have as part of your thinking that not only are you going to launch initiatives, but you're going to launch a cocoon around the initiatives to provide this sort of support. And you should have that role, or think about keeping that as your role or your Rescue SF's role. You have to scale to do it until it's somebody else's, like maybe the city takes it over, or maybe becomes another organization that does just that while you go off and solve some other problem. But if you don't do that, then you'll launch a bunch of initiatives and you'll get that flat line, and 3 years later, or 2 years later, or 1 year later, we'll be having the meeting again and spawning them again. In reaction to that, Mark, Lori, Carolyn?
I think it's a great idea and a really important point. We've talked about that in our conversations with Michelle, the idea about being a backbone organization, sort of taking a broader view of our role in overseeing a process.
Right.
So that's definitely on our agenda.
Ongoing process, right? All right, well, let's flip into a case. In fact, the case. This is the pickup from last topic, really. Remember the example we went through of how someone could work with a team to do an assessment of where things were. And I put that services work plan for you at the end of last session, which many of you commented on as being very helpful and interesting. Well, that very work plan was used in this case with a company we're going to call Gemco, slight variation on the real name. And let's, I know you looked at this ahead of time. I'm going to work this case here right now. Let me, Rodney, could you read the www? What does this company do? And this was part of the project, was to figure this out even, but go ahead, Rodney.
Okay. Gemco provides what? Software to support mine planning and design of physical structures and process flows. For who? Those responsible for mine safety and suppliers at the world's 50 largest precious mining companies, including De Beers. Why they pay for it? To improve safety, supply chain management, and lower cost.
Right. So the company that was doing this was a $50 million firm based in Vancouver. They had offices in every major part of the world, all the continents, London, Melbourne, South Africa, Chile. And they were owned by private equity. And the private equity investors felt that the provider of this software that did this was underplaying. Does anybody read this carefully enough to be able to tell us what they thought the opportunity was? One of our star students.
Yeah, it looks like their opportunity is to kind of expand into a new market, which is like a customer service, like a training market for the customers that.
Yeah, rather than just providing the software, the idea was, hey, maybe we could help our clients use the software and get full value for it. So it's not so much a new market as in a new audience, it's a new offering to the same audience, which is sort of a full service solution. Rather than the software, be the software plus the services around the software to set it up, run it, make sure they got full value. Make sense? So they're calling you in. I want you to internalize yourself as the ones coming in here. And there's going to be an offsite for the 18 top executives from all these offices across the world. They're going to meet, actually they're going to meet in Chile. And also not only the unit leaders from each of those offices, but the key functional leaders. So the ones in charge of the software, the ones in charge of selling, the ones in charge of services, and all the leaders from the different units are all going to meet this 18-person thing meeting down in Chile. And they've hired you. You presented that work plan, and they hired you because you're an expert in building businesses that don't just provide software, that also provide services. So you know how to do that. You are an expert in that now. So now this is a different kind of sell now, right? You are the expert. But you're still going to play it as a process because you don't know their business. You've been hired to facilitate an all-day session on how things are going in their initiative to provide services. So you do what we talked about. You do electronic survey, you do phone interviews with the key thought leaders, you consolidate all that input, you review it with the CEO and the CFO who's operating as a sort of a point person on this initiative. He's the sponsor. You congratulate them on getting where they've gotten to so far, and then you share with them what you've collected about the current state, the target state, the case for change, and things that need to be happening. And you develop a list of initiatives. So you do that first with the CEO and CFO, then you do that at the offsite. And at the offsite, you've got the 18 people in the room, and you've gone through each of those one at a time, shared with them what they gave you, facilitated an opportunity for them to ask questions to each other and delete things, add things, consolidate things, and ultimately get clarity and say, yep, that's how we are today. Yep, that's why we need to change. That's where we want to go. Now let's start filling out the rows to say, what are we going to do? So here, this light gray are a list of initiatives that they came out with to turn into action as part of the process. Those pages of these. But one of the things they identified was people were charging too much of their time to overhead. People who were supposed to be providing services were charging overhead basically on the bench, which was driving their utilization. So the percentage of their labor that was being spent doing things that led to revenue was low. So they wanted to increase the direct utilization from 67% to 85%, get people more billable, providing more value. And they wanted to do that by whilst also maintaining their target margins of 55%. Remember what target margin is? You take the revenue less the direct cost, the cost of the labor, and then whatever else that goes into generating the revenue, take what's left over, that's your gross margin. As a scale number, as a percentage of the revenue, that's your ratio, and that's the 55%. And then they wanted to make sure that their hourly billing rate was preserved at $120 an hour. So that's the initiative. So you're on the team to drive that initiative. So what did you do? Well, first of all, you put together a change framework. You said, hey, everybody's spending too much time on overhead. Utilization is 67%, but we want it to be 85%. We're currently at 120 an hour and we want to keep it there. Where margin is 55, we want to keep it there. And if we do this, indirect labor costs are too high and drag down profits. We're not going to make the money we need to generate the value we need to meet our investment thesis. And customers starting to bail on us because they have needs and they're unmet, and they may think other providers can meet those needs with their software as opposed to with ours. We need to do something to keep those customers. So what is it you're going to do? Anybody want to suggest what the initiative would be here? So what are you trying to do?
I would think that you'd want to build a professional services team or arm.
They have people. They have people that are supposed to be providing services, but those people are charging their time to overhead instead of to services. So what we want to do is somehow get them to be ramping up their time on services. Those people already exist. So what are you going to tell them to do?
Get clear when it's paid time.
Say again, Alan.
Get clear when the hours that they're working, they're maybe not allocating it to a client.
Okay, so let's say that you think that's the case. You're going to tell them, hey, you guys should be charging more of your time to direct to the clients, right? On your timesheet, you're putting it here, it should be there, right? So let's say that's what you said, whether that's right or wrong, let's just say that's what you said. That's a good guess or a good suggestion. At least this team thought it was. So they turn that, how are we going to do that? So what would you do to do that, Alan? Suppose you wanted to get everybody to charge their time to a different place. How would you do that? And remember, these people are all around the world.
I think just getting clear on what constitute like I guess having a clear guideline of what is, paid time as opposed to overhead. Like,
okay, so you would come up with that, and then how would you get the word out? You wouldn't, there's maybe 100 people here, 1,000 people, some would say. You would send an email, send a letter, tell them to have an all hands meeting, nationwide, worldwide. What would you do?
I guess the word has to get out to their supervisors to relay it to the workers.
Okay, so you have a chain of communication to get the word out. So you would develop and implement a communication strategy to inform every employee they're not to charge idle time without manager permission, right? So you can't just charge them nothing. So what we're going to do is conduct communications audit, launch selected initiatives, conduct communication. So you're going to have a bunch of stuff you're going to do. And then what are you going to watch to know how well you're doing? You're going to watch direct utilization, right? It should change. It should go from 67% more towards 85%. And ultimately, when you get to 85, you're done. Key considerations: a mechanism other than email for tracking responses to communications from multiple vehicles needs to be developed and implemented. The passive and minimal efforts to impact time-changing behavior. However, more centralized focus. So these are the things you're worried about, okay? Now, you've thought this through, you come up with a plan, you execute the plan, and something happens. So here we are with our action analysis. Now, you've done something and something happened. So as Michelle just said, that's built off of the action review, after action review. The slight difference between the military version of this and this is this. Mostly when people do that in the military, they're thinking, we had a major thing we were doing and we did it and we're done with it and now we're going to look at it. With the slight difference here is we've done something, but it's part of a continuous set of things. We're nowhere near done. We've just done one part of it. But we're going to do like an after action equivalent in the moment, in a sense. So we've done one thing out of a month, out of a whole portfolio of things that are still happening and going to happen. So I kind of prefer to just say an executive review of an action as opposed to an after action, which kind of implies to me that you're doing it after everything is done. So that's a nuance. So we're going to do a little bit of a breakout here. But first, in the main room, we're going to talk about the first 3 steps and then break out to do the other 3. In the first 3, we're going to look at what we were trying to do, what we did to do it, and what happened. And then you're going to break out in your teams and answer 3 other questions. why did what actually happen? What do you learn from that? And what are you going to do next? So I want you to own it. You were in this situation, you got that line item, you got that action, you took this step, and here's what happened. So here's what you did. So here are the first three. Your intent was to increase direct utilization. The initiative is to direct staff to charge more time and services. That was what you're doing in order to increase direct utilization and whilst also maintaining hourly rates and margins. So what did you do? You announced the goal to increase time spent on direct activities. Seems reasonable. And you told staff to charge not to overhead, but to direct client services. What do you think happened? Real case. What do you think happened? Andrew?
Profits went up.
What went up?
Gross profit.
Well, that would be nice.
Nothing.
Well, the very first thing that happened is staff charged more time to client services, which is exactly what you wanted, right? They did in fact do that. But and the utilization went up. Yay, utilization is up to 65%. Coming from 65% to 78%. Not quite to the 85 we're targeting, but it's definitely in the right direction. But just, some of the hours that were charged were unproductive. They added no value, so they couldn't charge for it. So yeah, the time was charged, but the dollars weren't charged, so their rate per hour dropped and the margins dropped. So just the opposite of what you said, Andrew. If they had billed for those hours, which they could have done if they were valuable, would have been one thing. But this is what happens. So what we want you to do is now take it from there. I was starting to get into it right there and giving you a little bit of a clue. But go drop into your teams and answer the next three questions. So what we want you to do is experience what it's like to be accountable to an outside board, a set of reviewers, your boss and maybe a couple of other people, to explain what happened after doing something and what you learn and what you're going to do next.
Question for Peter.
Huh?
Sorry, just a question on that. Like, say you were charging $120 an hour. Like, how did it? I don't understand how the price per hour.
That's why I want you guys. You can struggle with that in your groups. By the way, Peggy, you're going to step in for Joe and go out with Alan and Andrew. Okay.
Hey Peter,
yeah.
Is there a way to see that last slide again so I can use it as reference for the breakout?
Can you take a picture of it?
Yeah, I'm gonna screenshot right now. One second.
And I think it's also in the breakout instructions.
Okay.
If you want to grab them off the learning system, and Allison, you may have a link to that if you can put it in the chat.
I got it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to get the breakouts configured, but
take care of the breakout, Allison. Dan, how did you get it? Did you get it in a link off of a link?
I just used the snippet tool and save it.
Anybody else want to grab it while it's here? Or you can get the link off the learning system, or I'll put it in the chat when we break here. Let me do that. I don't have it handy. You can, oh, here it is, right here. There we go. Where's my chat? I guess I can chat while I'm in the sharing mode. Here you go. This is a link to the to those points into the case, into the instructions. So go ahead and break out. Take 15 minutes to caucus on that. Figure out. Come up with some logic as to why what happened might have happened, what you learned from that, and what you're going to do next, and then come back to the main room and we'll spend some time debriefing what you've come up with, and then I'll share with you what we came up with when that happened. Okay.
Does everyone see the link? And then I'm gonna break everybody out. I just want to make sure everyone's got what they need before we go. Everybody good? Thumbs up? Yes. Okay. I see a few. All righty.
Or as a leader, you want to make it happen, then you can take steps to make it happen.
So Peter, it might be interesting to talk about when the leader is, this continuous font of new ideas. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we all sit back and hope that most of them are going to go away, or that we don't really want to chase all of them because the leader doesn't, really retain, 90% of them. So there's kind of a
meaning they're going to just come out and he's going to forget about them next month.
pretty much. I mean, if someone's spouting dozens of ideas every single time, you realize it's just brainstorming. It's not,
right.
So how do you actually, so the process of testing the leader for their commitment before you go chasing it, and then they say, oh, well, that was just a passing thought.
So that's an interesting way to put it, an interesting question. I mean, for me, it's like, these are just good ideas. It's up to me to figure out which ones I really want to do, right? I could say that which one does he really want to do? And then I'm subjected to that. But in that case, I was explaining, it's like, I'm trying to decide which ones of all these great ideas, which ones am I going to do? So it kind of goes both ways. If I'm the leader though, and I really do want something to happen, I better have just a few of these and make clear, like you're saying, which one you really want to do. So
right, and they want to line up with your change framework.
Right.
And that's part of your story.
Right.
And that's part of what gets cascaded.
Right.
Well, in my observation, Peter, is you became his first follower for that great idea, and then you modeled that and you had to go out and get your first followers in order to make that happen.
Right, and then he could point to what we were doing to the others around the room, and they could decide to jump on and do it themselves.
Right.
But I think Denise's point is it can be an orchestrated process where on either side, either the leader or the recipient of the leader's input can decide, do they really want to do this? And if they need to really decide, because if they don't, it's just going to be another idea. And actually, everything we're talking about, like we said, all of this is dirt simple. It's really a matter of decision and force of will. Drive. Do I really want to do this? Then let's make it clear and let's really make it happen. So the only hard part is really deciding what you really want to have happen. Because after that, it's all orchestration and you just use all these tools to do it. That's the only hard part. But that's a pretty hard part. And anybody else want to? Oh, the other thing I was going to say in this point I was making, this one's also interesting. Model the target behavior. So again, in that business that Jim and Peggy and I were in, we were wanting to change the way people behaved. And what I ended up doing was going into the forums in which people were working together and talking about whatever it is they were doing. I kind of showed up everywhere, and everywhere I could see what was happening that was consistent with what we wanted and what was not consistent. And I would constructively share in that moment, and respond to what I thought. Either people were behaving the way I wanted or doing the things I wanted, and I would honor it and praise it, or they weren't, and I would point it out and suggest and show what I did want, and then empower somebody to do that going forward on my behalf, so they could see what was going on, say it was, or like Jim would get what I was trying to do, and then he would just become me and going forward with that group. People used to say, wow, you're showing up everywhere, you're everywhere. And I said, yeah, and I was doing that consciously because it was really important. I really wanted everybody to start thinking and behaving in a completely different way. So I just showed up everywhere and sprinkled that little stardust relative to the pluses and minuses of what was going on. I don't know, Peggy and Jim might even remember that, but.
It was only 20 years ago. Yeah, I can still.
So anyway, show up, basically. It says model the behavior you're looking for. Point it out, make sure people see it, understand it, and how what they're doing is or isn't consistent with it. Praise it, honor it, promote it. Have an award. Who is it that Touchstone, Rodney? Remember we used to have the reward for whoever or whatever team most dramatically exhibited the behavior we were targeting. We would have awards for that. That's why we did that. We want people behaving this way. Let's tell them we want it that way. Let's reward them when they do it that way. Okay. We'll consolidate this.
Peter,
Yep.
the example you gave of the CEO with the ideas, what you did when you took that idea, that was like a change framework. You took that idea, turned it into a change framework and drove it.
Yeah, basically said, first I had to get it, right? So, yeah, I really do want that. And then I said, okay, well, where are we? Why would that be good? And then I said, okay, if we're doing the new thing, we'll look this way. Then it was like, what are the 10 things we need to do to get there? And so then now you're driving a campaign or a series of innovation, initiatives, projects, mandates, impacts, imperatives, whatever you want to call them, going from left to right. That's what makes it happen. And then providing the governance to make sure you get what you're looking for until you decide, wait a minute, I didn't want this after all, let's stop it, let's do something else, or let's just make all this happen. As I was mentioning, it's most important is to figure out what you want to do. I think I mentioned last week about how Zuckerberg at Facebook every year has 4 things he wants to do, and everybody in the company knows what those 4 things are. And that's his way of doing that. And they make sure that all year long, everything they do is to make those 4 things happen.
That's that the wildly important goal thing. That's that.
It's in the same vein.
Similar. Yeah.
In the same vein. That's more the a goal than the initiatives, right? Because remember, very big, hairy, audacious goal. Remember we said at the beginning today, sell more as a goal, but it's what are the initiatives it's going to take to do that?
Right. One way I've seen that connect to each other is that they'll say that you pick those lofty goals, like you're saying, you're just using Zuckerberg as the example, and drill it in so well and detailed that from those lofty goals that you announced at the beginning of the year, if you're really, really good at it, you can break it all the way down into quite literally weekly initiatives and check-ins.
Right. The trick is, don't you announce them at the beginning of the year, but if you don't check on them continuously, then people will forget them. Like Denise said, next week there'll be 4 different ones. So the discipline that Zuckerberg has is to maintain it for a year. Now, it could well turn out that one of those shouldn't, in fact, have been the goal. So they drop that and replace it with something. So, but you're managing it at a higher level.
Right, like you said, I think it was very important is that picking those goals is an incredibly difficult task.
Right.
And in my experience, maintaining the discipline to not only announce and implement, but especially to supervise these things throughout the whatever weeks, months, quarters, it's incredibly difficult. It's like a job in and of itself.
That's right. That's the governance process we're talking about. Now, you point out that deciding what to do is most difficult and important. I am agreeing with you. But guess what? So does Stephen Covey. Remember when he said with the 7 habits of effective leadership? What's the one? End in mind. Like the only hard thing is, what are you trying to do? What is the thing you're trying to do here? That's why we start with that, right? That's where the WW comes. So basically, we're Covey for business. Now, I don't think this is controversial, but I'll explain why. This explains why prayer works. The power of prayer. Why does prayer work? But when you're going to ask the Almighty for some help, you're going to get very clear about what you want. So, and just by being clear, you increase the odds of getting it. You remarkably increase the probability of getting what you want when you're clear about what you want. In order to say a prayer about something, you need to be clear. And so you've increased the odds of getting it.
Right, that's in line with that, whatever Chrysler CEO back in the 70s, the first step to finding a solution is accurately identifying the problem.
Is that Iacocca?
It might be one of those big titans of industry guys, yeah.
All right, let's wrap up. That has been an interesting discussion. Thank you for that. So how do leaders manage, guide, and improve performance of their organization systems? Well, this is the scientific method applied to business. You say, here's what's going to happen, then you do something, and then you measure what happens and compare it to what you thought was going to happen. Explain why that happened, and then determine what you learned from that, and then make adjustments to operations and/or your way of projecting. And you repeat this until you have achieved your goal and you're running the way you want. And you would do this for your do, sell, and grow system. So it's project and perform. What happened? Why did it happen? What do I learn from that? So what, why, so what? Now what? What am I going to do differently? And this is your do and review in spades as you work with your different business systems to drive improvements through a change initiatives. So how do leaders pay attention to what's going on and make sure Everything they want to have happen is happening. Well, they do their executive review. What are you trying to do? What have you done to do it? What happened when you did it? Why did what happened happen? What have you learned from what happened? What do you plan to do next? Engage in a rich discussion, draw out, ensure you understand, ask questions to push up thinking, then offer the best advice. This is an executive review. This is what you'll do essentially in session 10. When you're doing your briefing for the outside reviewers, what we want you to really do is get very clear about what it is you're trying to do, what you're trying to do it, what is it you're looking for in the way of input, not on everything about your business, but on something about your business, and try to get into the pattern of working in this mode. So that is that. And we can throw it open for a few more minutes, or I can go into a preview for next session. Your call.
Do you mind if I provide a little link to a book here?
Go ahead, put it in the chat.
Okay. It has specifically to do with that concept that you were mentioning with Zuckerberg and other things. It was Covey was a co-author of this one. That same guy who wrote that 7 Habits of the Highly Successful.
What's the name of it?
The name is The 4 Disciplines of Execution.
Okay.
Yeah, that's from where I get that term, wildly important goal.
Yeah, yeah. And then there's the other, I think it's Collins calls it a big, hairy, audacious goal, BHAG.
Right.
Nick, I got that book on my bookshelf right in my office.
Perfect. That's that book is it's brutal. It's phenomenal and fascinating, but like we've been talking about here, maintaining the discipline to actually execute this stuff it's a tough one.
I wanted to, at this point, suggest you think about a template for your final review in session 10. So that we have basically at a high level, you want to say, where is your organization now? Why does it need to change? What are you doing to make it change? And how are you going to keep track of everything like we've talked about today to make sure it happens the way you want? And we have the tools and templates to work with. So as part of describing the current state, you have 4 basic kind of approaches to address. And you don't have to do them all, but we'd love you to do them all. And mostly what we want you to do is understand and internalize these to use them down the road. You have your what is it you're doing, for whom, and why do they need you to do it? And then you have your do, sell, grow processes, and then you have your metrics, and you have who's responsible for what. These numbers here point out the amount of weight we give to these when we're looking at your final deliverable, which comes after your review when you've modified your review materials and submitted it as your final briefing. And the most important of these is the WWW. So we give 10 points to that. So if you can't do everything, and of course you can't do everything. So you can't do everything equally well either. But what we're trying to say here is if you have to prioritize on the WWW. And that's why we put a 10 there. And then on your case for change, you have your enterprise level and your initiative level case for change. And you see here again, we want to put the emphasis on the initiative level. If you can only really dig in one place or the other, pick the initiative. We want you to really go deep on one initiative, not a little bit on a lot of initiatives, but a deep on one. And rather than focus on the whole organization, if you have to trade off time and attention, focus on a specific thing you're going to do. And then the initiative to action is important, which is basically getting you down to your plan, right? What resources are you going to assign to do what over what period of time? And that, and then, so these 3 make up 30 of the 50 points that you get for this. And then the governance, which we're talking about today and next week, about setting up a cocoon of support. And we'll talk more about this next week. And then there's some mechanics that we like to give a few points for, just so you are motivated to hand it in on time, give it the right name based on the instructions in the learning system, put it in a format we can edit so we can mark it up and give it back to you. I better not have any viruses. And it has to have upgrades from your executive session in session 10.
Quick question, or I guess just throwing it out there. So ATC, we're gonna have to shift our WWW abruptly as of about a week ago, or within the last week. And in our existing WWW that we got feedback from all of you guys, which was much appreciated, was in regards to our commercial sector of the company. But we are going to have to rapidly shift to focus on our residential sector. So we're going to be recreating our WWW. Is there any means, without having to like take more time out of your meetings, that we can submit residential WWW and get some feedback on it?
Before Peter, before you dive into that, I've been thinking quite a bit about that. I have been wondering, because you and I spoke offline privately about this, together last week. I've been wondering if it would be more concise or fair to everyone, my company involved here, if we stuck with the original focus of a specific part of our commercial platform that we've been kind of eyeing the entire time, rather than shifting gears late in the stream here. What are your thoughts on that?
It's up to you guys, and you can work it out with Jim's input, but the idea of the program is to give you a template that you can use anyway in any number of places forever. So the question you're asking is, where do we apply it? And you have a real business case that needs it even more than the business case you initially thought. I'll basically tell them what's happened, just so everybody knows. Nick, you want to share?
Sure. Yeah. Yesterday, I finished up a series of kind of interviews and meetings with summary answer. Home Depot just came and gave us 3 locations to start working at, which will immediately give us an injection of like 1.2 to 1.7 million a year, which will require like an abrupt onboarding of staff and new processes and oversight. And we have until basically the first week of February to get everything set up.
You say basically we're going to triple the size of your business?
No, but it'll increase it by like 40%, about 30%.
Significant impact.
Significant impact, yeah. And
clearly you want to use what you've learned here to manage that. So the tough question is, do you want to finish the learning on the case you have, which is not the most important one now, or do you want to switch everything over to this one? So I think our guidance is you should darn well use what you learned on the new case. And I think you guys are good enough and strong enough to go ahead and make the switch pretty straightforward. Just drop right into it. And it would be kind of silly to waste your time on the other if it's no longer the most important. So but it's your call. You can go either way. My instinct would be to just drop right into this and start using the material. So remember, we said your case is the course. Now your case just changed.
Yeah, we're living it, huh? If that's your instinct on it, then I'll trust your instinct on that one.
It's not. Remember, it's everything. I'm not running your business. You are. So even whenever you're taking advice from the outside, me or Jim or anybody, you want to factor it in. And you're the one that has to make the decision. You're the leader. That's part of your job, is to factor in that input, and you decide. You can decide with your team too, however you think it's most. Don't make me responsible. If it doesn't work, it's not my fault. It's still your fault. So
I'm blaming it all on you. I'm already said.
I think that, you know what, Nick? I want a piece of the equity.
Well, there's still more discussion to be had here. Attorneys hash it out, but just check your inbox.
Daniel's got my point. Okay.
I just want to say that one thing that's up for me in hearing all that is it sounds like you may have an initiative that's unfolding on your enterprise change framework that needs attention, that is going to have its own WWW and whatever else. So one way to look at what you're doing is that make this your initiative and blow it out that way.
That's pretty much what he's realized too, Peggy. And he's saying, should I start over and do everything in the program on that? Do I have time to do that? And will I lose anything by switching? So his choice is stick with the old one or just do what you just said. And you and I both said the same thing. Go to the new one, because you're going to get more value out of that.
Right.
All right. Let's just finish wrapping up here. So next topic is called Get Help. And what we'll do is look at a leader in the middle of a cocoon of support that we're going to talk about setting up, which includes an accountability board and a bunch of other things that leaders can and should do. And these are leaders of initiatives, projects, functions, units, companies, organizations, whatever, and how they can set themselves up to be far from lonely at the top, if you will. We're gonna look at a leader named Charlotte who led a company through a massive transition. It's very interesting, fun to work with. And what I want you to do is watch the video of her talking about what she did. And she's talking about it in a class at Harvard, and she talks through it, and there's some background material in the learning system. But we'd like you to use what you've learned in Minge to lead to look at what she's doing and say, what is she doing that's consistent with what we've covered? What is she doing that's different than what we've covered? And then what have we covered that she might be wise to have been using? And learn to use all of these tools and templates as a framework for assessing a leader in any given situation and doing anything they're trying to do. So you're now basically outside looking in at a leader, whilst also, of course, still being a leader. So think of it as being, and while you're running your company, you're on the board of another company, and you're looking at what's going on using what you've learned here. And we're going to start with a case called the organization dilemma. We're going to jump right into it like we did with the fishbowl for the CTO, disgruntled CTO. We're going to have a business that's grown very, very rapidly, and it has a choice. It's being driven by growth. It has to organize in some way, and it could do it in 3 different ways: by customer, by region, by function. And you need to come compared to say, as a consultant to the leader, or as the leader, which of these 3 you would do and why. That's your homework.
I role play Fred.
We'll see who gets to play Fred. I don't know if I'm going to let you do that, Jim, or not. Maybe. Fred's the outside consultant in the case. So feel free to break out now in your teams for as long as you want, up to 45 minutes. You might talk about what initiative you're going to take, like we were just starting to do with Nick. Which of the initiatives you're going to go with, and then how you're going to get from here to where you need to be to brief somebody on that in that final session. Okay.
All righty, thanks, Peter.
Yeah, I'll end the recording. I did, by the way, forget.
Oh, Peter, before I break things out, there's a note in the chat from Denise about sharing the previous slide.